Welcome to this year's Bowie lecture. You see our namesake on the screen. This year's Bowie lecturer is Annie Casanov. Well, for many of us, Annie doesn't need much introduction, but let me tell you a story. For me, it wasn't the case. I remember when I started at NASA Goddard with a background of seismology, one day my colleague, the late Jim Marsh, popped into my office and says, Annie Casanov is visiting us next week. I said, I don't think I know who that is. And then there was this pause, and Jim looked at me as if I were from Mars or somewhere. And soon afterwards, and more over the years, I came to understand why he had that reaction. In fact, I would have the reaction if somebody told me that same thing. Well, Annie, let me go ahead and introduce her. Annie received her education in University of Paris and University of Toulouse, where she got a PhD. Currently, she's the head of the Department of Space Geography and Oceanography, as much as I can make up, at the Space Geology Division of CNES in Toulouse, France. And of course, we all know what CNES stands for, so you don't want to hear me try to pronounce it. Well, in addition to serving many committees and the journal editorial boards, and in fact, she's the current editor-in-chief of the prestigious Earth and Planetary Science Letters, and she has written books, chapters, and in fact, a book on modern geodesy, which was published in 1994. And most of all, she has written approaching 100 journal papers and counting on an amazingly wide range of topics. These topics ranges from topography, mental dynamics, tectonic motions, to gravity, geoid determination, sea level, tides, to geophysical fluid variations, geocenter, time-varying gravity, and of course, not the least, Earth rotation dynamics. And over the years, Annie has received many honors and awards. She's an AGU fellow, which already says a lot. And she's a member of the French Academy of Science and a member of the Academy of Europe. And she's a recipient of EGS Finding Manis Medal and many more awards that I can't well pronounce. And among all these, Annie managed to find time to teach. And so far, she has released to the wilds 15 PhDs, not a small feat. Today, she's going to talk about the topic of her lecture today is satellite geodesy and global climate changes. Now, if you have listened to the talks earlier this afternoon and this morning, Annie's talk is going to present a global view of all the pieces that we talked about earlier. So let's hear from Annie, one of our best.
Thank you, Ben, for this nice introduction. So the subject of this lecture is indeed satellite geodesy and global climatic variations. And as you said, the subject I will discuss today has been addressed in many presentations today and yesterday. So I apologize to those who have attended this presentation to repeat things. but it's life. So the planet Earth is a complex system where each layer dynamically interacts with the other. For example, the outer fluid core interacts with the mantle through viscous and electromagnetic coupling. The mantle interacts with surface tectonic plates through mantle convection. The outer surface layers interact with each other in a very complicated way, and this is responsible for climate variation. But these fluid envelopes also interact with the Earth system, and this interaction can take a variety of forms. For example, motion inside the atmosphere and ocean, as well as redistribution of mass in the fluid envelopes, transfer angular momentum to the solid Earth, and this is responsible for fluctuation of the Earth's rotation. But this motion inside the fluid envelopes have other effects. For example, they change the Earth's gravity field. They are responsible for a motion of the center of mass of the Earth system. They change the global mean sea level. And because all this mass redistribution loads the solid Earth, they produce deformation of the Earth's crust. In this lecture, I am going to discuss all these effects, and I will concentrate on the seasonal time scale, but I will address also the interannual time scale as a matter of prospective research. The question of transfer of angular momentum between the fluid envelopes and the solid Earth have been abundantly investigated during the past 20 years. This is not the case for the mass redistribution inside the fluid envelopes. And the reasons are twofold. First of all, the effect of this mass redistribution on gravity fields, center of mass motion, or mean sea level have been available from space geodesy only recently. This is because the quantity to be measured are very small. They are on the order of a few millimeters only, whether it concerns gravity field variation or solid or mean sea level variation or even center of mass variation. So they are very difficult to measure. The second reason is that among the mass transfer variation that occur in particular at the annual time scale, but probably also at the interannual time scale, one of the largest contributors is the cycling of water over continents. And as we shall see later in this presentation, the global hydrological cycle is still very poorly known. Because the largest mass transfer occur at the seasonal time scale, let me briefly start by explaining or showing how mass transfer inside these fluid envelopes. The two main elements that are concerned are dry air and water in its different phases. Here you can see a plot of the seasonal change in atmospheric pressure. This illustrates the transfer of mass inside the atmosphere. Inside the atmosphere, the transfer of air mass are very large, have a very large spatial scale. But as you can see, they affect especially the northern hemisphere, air flowing from land and sea. The seasonal transfer across the equator is only a small part of the seasonal variation. Inside the ocean, the largest variation are of thermal origin, and they produce volume change of the oceans, and this is not of concern for the present lecture. However, large mass variation also occur in the ocean, and this is illustrated on this map, which shows the annual amplitude of the bottom pressure from an global ocean model. Here it is the POCM model, which it shows that at the seasonal time scale, large ocean mass variation occur, for example, here in the Central Pacific or in the Indian Ocean and Southern Ocean. The cycling of water between the various surface reservoir is the largest process that occurs at the seasonal time scale. ocean and continents exchange water with the atmosphere through evaporation and precipitation process. And part of this water is stored in the atmosphere as precipitable water. Water is also stored on the continent in various reservoirs, for example, in lakes, rivers, or in the snowpack, but also in the first 2 meters or first few meters of the soil. And this is what we call soil moisture. Among all this terrestrial water, the soil moisture variation and the snow variation are the largest seasonal variation. And this map shows for the 4 seasons, the change in the water content of the first 2 meters of the soil. The scale here is in millimeters of water. It ranges from 1 to 700 millimeters. You can see that there are large seasonal variation in the tropics, which is due to the fact that there is a large seasonal cycle in precipitation, but there is also a seasonal variation in mid-latitude of the northern hemisphere, where precipitation and evaporation are not in phase. Among all terrestrial water, the snow depth and coverage shows the largest variation. And here you can see for the 4 seasons the change in snow depth with the scale here in millimeters of snow. And you can see the large seasonal variation. Over Antarctic and Greenland, water accumulates annually, and it is lost also permanently through runoff, melting, and iceberg calving. In the case of these 2 ice sheets, the seasonal cycle of water is not well known, but it is in general assumed to be small. So the question is, what is the effect of this mass redistribution inside the 3 envelopes on the Earth system? There are 3 main effects. The first one is the change in the Earth's gravity field, or geoid. The second effect is elastic deformation of the Earth's crust under the load of this mass redistribution. And the third effect is the global change in the mean sea level. So I will successively discuss these 3 subjects. So I will start with the seasonal change of the geoid. Outside the Earth, the Earth's gravity field is classically expressed through an infinite series of time variable coefficients, which are called the Stokes coefficient. This Stokes coefficient represents the time variable integrated mass distribution inside the total volume of the Earth. And here, because we are concerned with mass redistribution inside the 3 envelopes, which are very thin compared to the size of the planet, it is customary to express this variation of the Stokes coefficient as a variation of surface loads, where the load can be the load of the atmosphere or the load of water in the soil or on the snowpack. Change in the Stokes coefficient, in turn, are responsible to change in the geoid, and the relation is shown. The simple relationship is shown by this expression. Space geodesy is now able to measure the time variation of the Earth's gravity field. By now, the method to determine the temporal variation of the Earth's gravity field rely upon classical space geodesy techniques, that is, orbital analysis of closer satellites. During the past few years, a seasonal variation of the dynamical flattening, that is the degree 2 order 0 term of the geoid expansion, has been reported by many investigations. And on this figure, you can see an example of such seasonal variation of the dynamical flattening. Here it is based on a paper recently published by Cheng and Tapley. Expressed in terms of geoid variation, this change in the dynamical flattening amounts to about 2 millimeter amplitude. So this is very small. And you have here a number of recent investigations which shows the amplitude and phase. Here it is the date of the maximum of the variation. You can see that there is a rather good agreement between these determinations. And we have maximum variation in winter of the northern hemisphere. Concerning the other degree 2 terms, you can see that their amplitude are much lower than for the C20 term, and then never exceed 0.5 millimeter in terms of geoid variation. Now, if we look at the higher degree terms, for example, C30 and C40, we have still some difference in the published determination, which probably means that we are at the limit with the classical methods to determine these terms, these higher degree terms. A motion of the center of mass of the Earth system is expected due to this mass redistribution inside the fluid envelopes. The center of mass of the Earth system includes, of course, the solid Earth plus the surface fluid envelopes, and we call the center of mass the geocenter. Space geodesy is now able to measure this motion. In fact, the 3 coordinates x, y, and z of the center of mass are related to the degree 1 terms of the geoid expansion. This means that the geocenter motion participates to the geoid variation. The methods that are classically used to determine the geocenter motion is based on the determination of the temporal variation of the coordinates of geodetic station. Indeed, being attached to the outer surface of the solid Earth, the geodetic station defines a terrestrial reference frame whose center is called the center of figure. This center of figure, in fact, coincides with the center of mass of the solid Earth. Space geodesy recently has shown that the coordinates of the geodetic station show temporal variation, in particular at the annual frequency. Part of these variations are due to the load of the atmosphere and other fluid surface loads. I will talk of this in a moment. But there is a common component common to all stations, which is due to the motion of the center of mass, or geocenter, around the center of figure. So by studying the time variation of the coordinates of the geodetic station by satellite geodesy, it is possible to determine this motion. The most recent determination indicates that the geocenter motion has an amplitude of ranging between 2 and 3 millimeters. You can see the 3 coordinates here. So it is about a factor of 2 larger than for the dynamical flattening. And the maximum of the signal, of this annual signal, occurs in winter of the northern hemisphere. Here is a view in 2 dimensions showing the excursion of the center of mass inside the Earth. Okay, so now with this the determination of this temporal variation of this geoid term, the component, it is possible to visualize the seasonal variation in the geoid by combining the individual variation. So this is done on this figure, which shows for each season the geographical variation of the geoid. The scale here ranges from -5 millimeter to +5 millimeter. It's now millimeter of geoid, no more millimeter of water. In winter, we note a large positive geoid variation, which corresponds to an excess of mass, which amounts about 5 millimeter, and which is located on the Eurasian continent. In summer, we have the opposite pattern, with mass deficit over the continent of the northern hemisphere and the mass excess here in the Pacific Ocean. In spring, we observe a shift of this mass excess toward North America, where the amplitude here is about 3 to 4 millimeters in geodate. and again an opposite pattern in autumn. So it is possible to independently estimate the contribution to the geoid variation of the variable surface load. The three main contributors are from the atmosphere in terms of dry air mass and water vapor. The second contributor is soil moisture and snow, and the ocean mass variation of water mass inside the ocean also contributes to the geoid variation. We have available now a number of climatic data sets which allow us to determine this geoid variation. For example, for the atmospheric pressure, we have this time series from the reanalysis of the European Center or the NCEP. There are also a number of time series of soil moisture and snow, for example, from the Global Soil Wetness Project for soil moisture and snow, but there are also other grids available. I have no time to enter into the details. For the ocean mass, a number of authors or investigators use the Topex Poseidon data corrected for steric effect, but there are also a number of outputs of ocean circulation model which can be used to estimate this ocean mass variation. So it is easy to compute a synthetic geoid using the relationship I shown before, relating the surface load to the geoid variation. And here, as an example, you can see the effect on the geoid, the seasonal effect on the geoid due to soil moisture and snow. The largest effect occurs over the continents of the northern hemisphere, here, for example, in spring, and the largest contribution here is due to the snowpack, to the snow load. The amplitude here ranges from -6 millimeters to +7 millimeters of geoid. Here is another example for the ocean load. The effect of the ocean is much smaller, about a factor of 2 smaller. Indeed, the scale, you can see the scale here, it ranges between -1 millimeter to +2 millimeters. And we note that there is a positive variation which change from one season to another, from the Atlantic to the Pacific and to the Indian Ocean. So now we can combine all this contribution, and this is shown on this plot, where we have here the total contribution of soil moisture, snow, ocean mass variation, and pressure effect. The scale here ranges between -10 millimeters of geoid to +8 millimeters of geoid. Again, we note that the largest variation occurs over the continent, and it's worth mentioning that the largest contributor is snow. So we can now compare this predicted geoid variation with the observed variation from spatial-geodesy. But for that comparison, we must consider only the longest wavelength, that is the wavelengths which are currently determined by spatial-geodesy. So I have to come back to a previous plot. Okay, here you can see this comparison. Here on the right-hand side, you have the seasonal variation of the geoid determined by spatial-geodesy, and on the left-hand side, the predicted variation using the surface load. You can see that the comparison is very, very good in winter and summer in particular. The scale is the same on both maps. In spring and autumn, in fact, we find the same pattern in the observed geoid by spatial-geodesy and on the computed geoid. But we note that there is less amplitude here in spring and autumn in the geoid predicted from climatic data. And in fact, if we look at the difference between these two sets of maps, we note that we observe that in winter and summer, the difference is almost zero, of course. And in spring, we have, and autumn, we have a difference, an amplitude of about 1.5 millimeter. And what is interesting here is that the pattern seen in the residual geoid resembles very much that resembles very much to the contribution of soil moisture plus snow to the geoid. So this result is important because it first means that space geodesy is indeed able to measure millimeters change in the geoid, that is the transfer of matter inside the fluid envelopes. And the second important observation is that it shows also that terrestrial water budget is not very reliable at the moment. This has been said in many presentations today, and this is another illustration of this. But overall, this means that space geodesy, in principle, will be able to constrain the terrestrial water budget, in fact, to offer some information on this problem. Why is this important? We have seen this plot already today. This is important for the following reason. Understanding how water is exchanged between the atmosphere and land surface is of primary importance for predicting climate variability and evolution. Climate, as you know, is determined by a dynamic equilibrium in which the atmosphere affects the land surface and in turn is affected by them. Just after sea surface temperature, soil moisture and snow is the second most important boundary condition in coupled global ocean circulation model, ocean and atmospheric circulation model. Indeed, soil moisture determine the radiative properties of the vegetation. It also determines or control the thermal properties of the land. On the other hand, the snowpack is a critical component of the climate system. This is so because snow has a high reflectivity and then it affects the Earth's albedo. On the other hand, fresh snow acts as a thermal insulator, and snow melting is a thing for latent heat, and it releases water to the ground and to the atmosphere. By now, we have no global observation of soil moisture and snow. Some in-situ data exist, but they are very sparse, and they are not at all representative of broad areas. There are also satellite observation or remote sensing observation, but these data are representative of the first few millimeters of the ground, and they are inadequate in highly vegetated areas. There are some good observation of snow coverage from satellites, but the information on snow depth from onboard radiometers, again, is not very reliable. So at the time being, the estimate of global soil moisture and snow rely on model only. There are two different approaches for determining soil moisture and snow. One approach is based on this simple water balance equation, which relates soil moisture, the change with time of soil moisture, to precipitation, evaporation, and runoff. And here, the observation are precipitation, and evaporation is in general predicted with more or less sophisticated land surface scheme, and it is based also on observed temperature. About 50 years ago, Tom Sweat proposed a simple method to estimate evapotranspiration from observed temperature. And this approach has been used by a number of investigators in the early 80s. For example, Mintz and Serafini Wilmot and co-workers, and more recently by Wang and co-workers. And this, with this simple method, they have provided global grids of soil wetness or soil moisture and snow. Recently, the Global Soil Wetness, the GWEX project initiated the pilot studies, which is called the Soil Wetness Project, with the objective of providing more accurate soil wetness grids or climatology. The difference between the previous climatology is that this project use state-of-the-art land surface parameterization driven by meteorological observation. In principle, the data set from this project, which covers 2 years, 1987 and 1988, should be of better quality than previous climatology. So this is the first approach. The second approach is based on outputs of global circulation model. But there, for example, the reanalysis of NCEP or European reanalysis. But there are some problems with this data set. One being that the observations that directly affect soil moisture, for example, precipitation and temperature, are not assimilated into the models. So this may be a problem. In year 2001, the GRACE mission will be launched. It will have the objective of recovering time variation of the gravity field with a resolution with a very high resolution, a spatial resolution of a few hundred kilometers, and a temporal resolution of 1 month or better. We have heard many presentations of the GRACE mission, so I will not spend time on it, but just I want to show this curve, which has already been shown in the previous talk. This is from a recent study by John Warr and co-workers. It shows the spectrum of the geoid as a function of harmonic degree, or equivalently of wavelength, due to GRACE instrumental errors, and the signals due to continental water storage, ocean, atmosphere, ocean, and even atmospheric errors if the atmospheric load is removed. So we can see from this plot that over a broad range of wavelengths, that is for wavelength larger than about 1,000 kilometers, this signal, in particular the continental water storage, will be recovered without difficulty. The problem there will be to remove the other contribution, in particular the atmospheric contribution. So now I move to the second subject, which is the seasonal deformation of the Earth's crust. Because these mass redistributions load the solid Earth, they produce periodic deformation of the Earth's crust, which respond elastically, especially in the vertical direction, to the load of these fluid envelopes. So the largest variation is in the vertical direction here, and it is related to the load, Q, through what we call the load log number. So knowing the load, we can compute the vertical deformation of the Earth's crust, or inversely, if the vertical deformation is observed, for example, by satellite geodesy, we can have information on the load. So it is easy to compute, using the climatic data set shown previously, how the crust will deform under these various loads. On the top panel, you can see the effect in the vertical deformation of the Earth's crust due to soil moisture here. The scale here is in millimeter. It ranges from 0 to about 6 millimeters. So now it's millimeter of surface deformation. The largest deformation occurs in the tropics, as expected, because it is here that we have the largest annual variation in soil moisture. For snow, the largest deformation occurs in the northern latitude in the high latitude of the northern hemisphere. So in both cases, we can see that we can have several millimeters of deformation due to the terrestrial water. The effect of atmospheric pressure is in general lower. The scale is the same as previously, and you see that we have an effect which is about half that of snow and soil moisture. And the ocean effect is still much lower, and it does not exceed about 1 millimeter of deformation. So now the total predicted effect is shown on this figure. Here we have plotted the annual amplitude of the total deformation. And again, we can see that in some continental regions, very large deformations are expected due to the surface load. The scale here goes from 0 to 8 millimeters. So we can have almost 1 centimeter of annual variation in some regions. Space geodesy has recently determined a number of annual motion of some geodetic stations. I will show 4 examples. Example for 4 Doris stations. Here you can see the Doris network, and the station that for which I will show example are Yellowknife in Canada, Badari in Asia, Dakar in Africa, and Yarra Gadi in Australia. And this plot shows for these 4 stations, in blue, the observed annual variation in the vertical coordinates of this station. This is the blue curve determined here from the Doris system, but the other space geodesy system also observes this kind of variation. And in red, we have the predicted variation of deformation due to the surface load. So you can see that in Yellowknife and Badari and Yarra Gadi, the agreement is very, very good. In Yellowknife and Badari, the deformation here is due to the snow. In Yarra Gadi, it's a combination of ocean load and atmospheric load. And in Dakar, it is expected that the deformation is due to soil moisture. But we see here some discrepancy, and maybe it's an error in the Doris annual motion, but it is also possibly due to the uncertainty in the soil moisture in at this location. So the coverage of the Earth's surface by space geodetic station is becoming denser and denser, and here you can see on this plot the location of the geodetic station from the International Terrestrial Reference Frame. So it's a combination of Doris, GPS, VLBI, laser, etc. Station. So we expect that accurate determination of this vertical motion, not only at the annual time scale, but also at the interannual time scale, will provide an independent constraint on this surface mass redistribution. So the last topic now that I want to discuss today is the seasonal change of the global mean sea level. Topex Poseidon has recorded an annual variation of the global mean sea level. It is shown on this plot here. It is the raw data are in red, and an annual cycle is superimposed here. This annual variation has an amplitude of about 5 millimeters, and it is maximum by the end of September. It is well known that part of this annual variation is due to thermal expansion or contraction of the ocean water. So this effect has first to be removed if we want to study the amount of water which is added or removed to the ocean and which comes from the other reservoirs. So to estimate the steric contribution or the thermal contribution, there are a number of there are a number of data available, in particular the Levitus climatology, which provides temperature and salinity data at different depths in the ocean. So it is possible to have an estimation of this steric contribution. What you can see in terms of global sea level is that the steric sea level is completely out of phase to the observed sea level. The amplitude is about the same, 5 millimeter, but the maximum here is in spring. So if we remove this effect to the observed global mean sea level by TOPEX, we will have a residual sea level which will have an amplitude twice the observed amplitude. So this amplitude is about 9 millimeter and is maximum in autumn, in September. So the annual sea level, corrected for the steric effect, should be balanced by the water mass variation in the other surface reservoir, for example, atmospheric water and continental waters. So we can independently estimate this variation using, again, the climate data that we have used previously to estimate change in the geoid or in the vertical motion of the geodetic station. So this comparison is shown here. This plot is very busy, but I will explain what is on this view graph. In dark blue, you can see the annual variation of the global mean sea level observed by TOPEX Poseidon, but corrected for the steric variation. So it should represent only the variation of water mass. The atmospheric effect is shown here. You can see that it contributes for only 2 millimeters in terms of sea level. The soil moisture is shown by this green curve. It contributes also to about 2 millimeters in equivalent sea level. So same contribution as water vapor in the atmosphere. Here again, you can see that the largest contribution comes from the snow. It is the light blue curve, and it amounts about 6 to 7 millimeters in equivalent sea level. And the total contribution is shown by this white curve here. You can see that the agreement is rather good. So this is a comparison made by a set of climatic data. Sorry. We can make another comparison using other sets of climatic data, in particular for soil moisture and snow, and this is shown here with the most recent the soil moisture and snow data from the Global Soil Wetness Project. We have in general a better agreement. Here, but again, you can see that the largest contribution comes from the snow. Here, the total hydrology is larger than the observed global sea level, while in the previous case, it was smaller. So if we look at the difference between the observed sea level and the predicted sea level from soil moisture, snow, and water vapor, in one case, we have a residual curve which is maximum in autumn here. It is the red curve with an amplitude of about 2 millimeters, and for the other case, with GSWP data, we have the same amplitude, but the phase is opposite. In fact, in the first data set here, the snow data, the snow grid includes the contribution of Greenland and Antarctica. But if we isolate the effect of Greenland and Antarctica, we find that in fact it contributes very little to the seasonal sea level. The amplitude does not exceed 0.7 millimeters. So this is not the contribution of the ice sheet which can explain this phase opposition of this residual sea level. So this again stresses the uncertainty on the soil moisture and snow contribution. So now I come to the perspective. So the results I have discussed so far concern only the annual variation. This is because the annual cycle carries the largest energy, so it is the most easy component to extract either from the climatic data and from the space geodesy data. But it's clear that the interannual variations are more interesting because they are related to present-day climate change. On the side of the hydrometeorological data, at present we have already available a number of time series. For example, for surface pressure, time series are available for several decades. It is the same for soil moisture and snow. Time series are available for several years, but this time series available are from the global circulation model. And as I mentioned before, these are predicted value, and we don't know at present if they are very reliable. For snow, we have only climatology or from the Global Soil Wetness Project on 2 years of data. So this is a pity, but there is much hope from the side of climatic data. Things will evolve rapidly. In particular, the Global Soil Wetness Project plan to compute several years of soil wetness, soil moisture and snow. And this new data set should be released in about 2 years. From the side of space geodesy, we have already in hand interannual variation of the global mean sea level. And here is, this is illustrated on this plot, which shows the interannual variation of the global mean sea level. This is the blue curve measured by Topex Poseidon. And we are here is superimposed the sea surface temperature. The difficulty for here will be to separate the thermal effect from the ocean mass variation. So from the amount of mass which is added or removed to the ocean at the interannual time scale. Concerning the time series of vertical coordinates of the geodetic station, a number of systems have already computed in time series of vertical motion, and here are examples for a number of day stations. Other system have provided the same kind of information, but the problem there will be to separate the interannual variation due to the surface fluid envelopes from long-term or secular variation associated with the internal process, for example, post-glacial rebounds or other tectonic process. So this will rely on model. Concerning the geoid, we have already available a number of interannual variation of the Stokes coefficient, but the much hope in this on this topic will come from the GRACE mission that we have already mentioned, and that has been presented several times today and yesterday. So GRACE will not only be able to provide information on the terrestrial water budget, but will also provide some very valuable information on the transfer of mass inside the ocean, and of course on the mass balance of the ice cap. So as a final remark, I would like to recall that space geodesy has been and is still being producing a lot of information in various areas of Earth science. For example, on core dynamics through observation of nutation of the magnetic field, on mantle dynamics through observation of the Earth gravity field, of course on surface tectonics and on the seismic cycle, so precise positioning. And now we have seen by the numerous presentations in this AGU meeting that there is a very exciting perspective for the coming years for studying the fluid envelopes through the determination of the temporal variation of the gravity field, the sea level, the mass balance of the ice cap with a number of missions which will be launched in the coming years, and the sea level variation with already we are doing this with TOPEX, but we will continue with JSON and Envisat. So to conclude, I would like to say that all these missions, GRACE, JSON, Envisat, ISAT, Cryosat, GHOST, etc., all these missions should be used in a cooperative mode in the future to extract the maximum information on these fluid envelopes. And this is very important because they are related to the global climatic change that is a very important problem. So I thank you for that feedback.